Good day to you. Kanye West, Michelle Obama, Madonna, Donald Trump. What do these four people have in common? They are all charismatic. They all have charisma. They all have something about the way that they communicate that people find fascinating, even magnetic. It gives them a sense of power, moreover, because people listen to them, because their opinions are heard and followed in many cases, and because people continue to admire the things that they do. So this is introducing what we're talking about in today's chapter, where I'm doing from the traditional office here at East Stroudsburg University. And what we're talking about is political life today. We're talking about the effect of social media on political life, much of which we've already talked about in several previous lectures. So you'll already have a background in this because I used a lot of my examples in the area of politics. And then also in the book today, there are lots of examples. So I'm not going to speak about as many examples as I am going to speak about the concepts. And I really encourage you to read about the examples, many of which you won't be aware of because they happened 2-3 years ago. And the shelf life of political issues, especially on social media now, is just incredibly quick. Things turn over in a couple weeks. So anyway, to continue on with power, which is what we were talking about there with those four individuals I mentioned early on, somebody like Kim Kardashian, who we mentioned also earlier in this class, as well as lots of other celebrities, because of their charisma, they have thousands and millions of followers. They have people who are following them on social media all the time, mostly through Twitter, but also through Instagram and a little bit through Tumblr. So these people have power. There's a second kind of power, though, and that is totalitarian power. And totalitarian power is, I don't quite like the book's definition of it. It's the means to use violence to curb any kind of protest. That's not what totalitarianism is really all about, although power and violence are certainly part of it. Totalitarianism speaks to the root of the word itself. It's total control. And when you look at it through social media is just another tool of the government's total control. When I studied in China, actually I meant to say when I taught in China, I taught a class for ESU in China in 2012, one of the big surprises I had was trying to go to Facebook. It seemed like the internet was right there for you. There was Google. Went on Google, typed up Facebook, page not available. That's because the Chinese government blocks Facebook. They have their own Facebook, which is internal to the country of China, and they control access through IP addresses just in China. China itself and the government has a whole ministry of propaganda, that's what they call it, and underneath that they have a whole level of bureaucracy, which is internet police is basically what they are, making sure that Facebook is closed down, etc. That's totalitarian control using social media. And then the third kind of control via power is bureaucratic control. Bureaucratic control, this is not the social media example, but it's illustrated best through the university that you attend. What's it like when you're going to schedule your classes? Do you find that you have parking fines that you have to pay? Do you find that you haven't satisfied math requirements, English requirements? Do you find that there are other issues that you're not even sure what the problem is, but you just cannot register? This is an example of power and control forcing you to pay those parking fines through the bureaucratic rules of the organization. And that's what bureaucratic power is all about. Now, the main intellectual thinker who's introduced into this chapter is Michel Foucault, Foucault. Michel Foucault is a Frenchman, and he wrote about a lot of things, but one of the concepts that he's most well known for is discourse. Discourse, again, I don't like the way the book defines it. Discourse, really, and I've studied a lot of rhetoric, so this definition is much more common because rhetoric and discourse are very related. Discourse is sort of the long-term conversation that a society has with each other. And that's what you're doing when you're discoursing. It's this conversation you're having. It's occurring across generations, and so it expresses values and sentiments, etc. In the U.S., for example, the Second Amendment is a long-term conversation. We've been having that conversation since that amendment was put into the Constitution. The right to bear arms. Today, we're still having that conversation. It's taking place on social media. So social media is another avenue for discourse and the power that goes alongside of it. And Foucault makes the point that one of the things that solidifies power amongst those who are engaging in discourse is record keeping. Those who keep records have a lot of power over you. There was a story in the newspaper today in the Pocono Record, very sad, A woman was died in 2011 in a storage trailer here, and a man has been indicted for her death. And one of the ways that they found out about it is by tracking his cell phone use. And when he would call and say that he was in Philadelphia after the body was discovered, turns out he was not. He was on his way to a bar in Goldsboro, Pennsylvania, the complete opposite direction. They knew about that through his cell phone use when they were able to subpoena those records from the cell phone company. The cell phone companies have a lot of records on you. If the National Security Administration wants to know who you made a call to a few minutes ago, they can find that out very quickly. And in fact, all overseas phone calls on cell phones are tracked. And that's just cell phones. Then there's Facebook, always, marking where you are, where your location is. And then there's all these side apps that you try to load on that ask you, is it okay if this app knows your location? You just, click yes because you want to get through it. All of this stuff is gathering information on you and storing it somewhere up there in the cloud. When you text somebody and you talk badly about a friend, that person that you texted potentially has that text. And if things change between the three of you, maybe you start getting along with one now and not the other, maybe that person has some power over you, and whether you're willing to reveal your true feelings, because you always fear that they can reveal that text that you sent them. So record keeping is very relevant in today's social media discourse sphere. Speaking of sphere, that's the next concept, the public sphere. This is a space where people come together to communicate, usually about important ideas to the benefit of everybody. In the old days, it was the town square. No TV, no phones, writing letters is no good. So you come and meet in person. That's the old days. Then later on, when communication came along in the form of telephone, etc., then it became kind of telephone communities, and it at least became communities that you didn't have to be living next door to the person to talk, because you could communicate by mail, and that was your public sphere. And by the way, that word sphere is spelled sphere. It means round, right? Spherical object is round. With social media, of course, the public sphere has been expanded to include potentially the entire world. No matter where you are, you can jump into a space and join with others who believe the same way as you do and start to address political issues. Within this public sphere, the book argues there are three different kinds of publics. You've got your network public. These people debate civic ideas. Civic is something that you do because it's part of contributing to your community. So if you have civic engagement, maybe you belong to the board of the Red Cross, or maybe you help pick up litter from a highway someday. You have a feeling inside of you that you want to contribute to where you're living for the betterment of all, without needing a financial reward. That's what civic means. And so a network public is one where people civically come together because they want to do those kinds of things that I just mentioned. And they use social media, through web pages, through tweeting out, through email, to make sure that everybody has the information about where they're getting together, what they're talking about, what the agenda is, etc. That's different from a network society. That's a second public that this book talks about. A network society is where you may belong to one particular smaller public or smaller group on social media, but then that overlaps with other groups. There was an article in the newspaper this morning by Kathleen Parker. Maybe many of you will not know her. Some will, maybe. She's a syndicated columnist for newspapers. So you can find her column in newspapers all across the United States. I think she's actually writing in North Carolina. And she revealed today that she's never been a Republican. She's always been a conservative. And it was very interesting because most of what she's written about over the years prior to Donald Trump and prior to George Bush was basically in favor of Republican candidates and Republican positions, and she comes from a southern state. So when she revealed in the column today that she's an independent and she has lots of problems with Donald Trump, it was kind of revelatory. It kind of was a surprise to many people who had been her fans. And what I'm trying to get at here is that her interest as a conservative didn't necessarily dovetail with becoming a Republican, and certainly didn't dovetail with becoming a Donald Trump supporter. And that's what network society refers to, is you belong to one smaller public on social media, but sometimes it conflicts with other larger publics, and sometimes it overlaps. And then you have counterpublics. Counterpublics, while we're talking about presidential politics, counterpublics are those publics that go against the mainstream public or against the mainstream majority view. So you've got your Bernie supporters. We've talked about Bernie supporters many times in class. And just one thing that they are really, really into is college education for free. Not just for the middle class, but for everybody. And so you find a lot of discussions going on against that, because even Hillary Clinton, the Democratic nominee, her position is not free education for everyone; it's free education for the middle class. So this is, and so Bernie supporters are countering that majority opinion. Now let's circle back a little bit to civic participation. That term civic we talked about earlier. Really what we've seen, and I think this is one of the most important points in the entire book that we've read so far, we have seen a major shift in the motivation for civic participation. Civic participation used to be that you felt that you had a duty to your community to try and improve it. And so you join some kind of committee or task force or organization, or you volunteer because you just feel like it's the right thing to do. Because of social media, the author of our book argues that we have shifted from duty to self-expression as the motivation for why we participate civically. That we want to be in those venues so that we can express ourselves publicly and be on display, and people pay attention to us and they like our ideas and they maybe even like us. But then we go home and we tweet and we tag and we share and we post photos and we post videos and we forward emails and we reply to everybody on emails and we get petitions going. And it's really become more about social media enabling people who otherwise might feel a little bit shy or nervous in those civic meetings if they were held in the town hall, because they're rookies or because they're young or because they don't have a higher position than some other people. Those people come home now, and now social media frees them up to express themselves as they would really want to. And so they say things that are sharper, they say things that are harsher, they say things that are more contrary to what you thought they were thinking. A very interesting idea that social media has changed the nature of civic participation, and maybe it's for the better. Maybe we have more people on shade tree commissions. Maybe we have more people on neighborhood watches. Maybe we have more people volunteering as baseball coaches, all because of social media. Who knows? That's for you to think about. All right, next thing I would like to go on to some of the tactics used. You will know these common sense-wise, but let's just get them on the table. Tactics used to get social movements going. Social movements like Bernie Sanders, now that he was not selected as the Democratic candidate, he's calling what he was doing a movement. So it's a movement to affect change in the United States. And to some extent, it really is. I mean, I have to tell you, I would have never imagined a person calling himself a democratic socialist even being in the game of politics. And to be in the game as late as he was in the presidential primary, truly incredible. Socialist is such a demonized term in the United States. Just as a side commentary, I've been in a lot of socialist countries and lived for somewhat long periods, months at a time in some of those countries. England, Sweden, spent a lot of time in France. They all have socialist elements to them. I see some pretty healthy operating societies with great healthcare systems, sidewalks you can ride on without tripping up, really generous family leave policies for married couples or couples who are not married having babies. I see a lot of really interesting good things in socialist countries that are not talked about. And Bernie Sanders rides the wave of this socialism. How is he able to do that? Probably through some of the tactics that his campaign was able to use, tactics that are available on social media. You've got the tactic of petitions. In the old day, if you wanted to get a bunch of signatures, you had to go around to doors of people's houses and knock and go back when they weren't home and speak to the right person when they weren't home, et cetera, et cetera. Today, you can get a petition going, you can get a web page going. All you need to do is click like, get how many likes on it. It's so easy on social media, and the Sanders campaign certainly used that. And then there are marches. Some of the Sanders supporters have been marching on Clinton rallies, Donald Trump rallies as well. And those marches are covered on social media, and they're talked about when those marches are going to occur. So, the marches are another tactic. And then you also have sit-ins, not so common. We saw one recently. The Democrat House members in the U.S. House decided to sit in to protest gun violence in this country and the lack of measures to try and curb gun violence. And of course, that was tweeted all over and had some public relations success. I don't know if it's going to have any success on policy. Now to move into the remaining main headings of the chapter and the terms that they are embracing, we've got mobilization. Mobilization is simply translating your resources into action. You know what it's like. People have lots of good intentions when they're talking about ideas. They talk about how they would like to do this and would like to do that, and wouldn't this be a great idea? But when it comes to actually happening, as you found out for your team projects, for Project Viral, It's hard to get people to move into action, to make phone calls, to send messages, to take votes. That's what mobilization is all about. It's bringing those people somehow into action. And then you have a term, I don't know if the book invented this or not, it's called slacktivism. That's just people who don't want to participate. Plenty of that in team projects. Or maybe it's not that they don't want to participate, it's just that they don't participate. They're slackers. You guys know that word real well. Then there's hacktivism. Hacktivism is where you are, as an organization, purposefully trying to hack into somebody's server or their web page to try and prove a point. We have that going on now. We don't know what the answer is, but supposedly the Russians have hacked into the Democratic National Committee, or maybe it's the Trump campaign, we don't know, to try and reveal secrets of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee and the way that it operates. It's a way to bring down the power of that organization. It goes on all the time. Here at ESU, we were hacked by the Chinese a couple years ago. They actually went into the radio station computer, and they brought down the whole entire network right during registration. So hacking goes on all the time. Then we got framing. Framing is a way of I guess, defining an issue or a person because of the way that you talk about it. And it's not the only way that it has to be defined, but in this particular case, the framing that is going on is dominant and has become successful. Like the framing of Islamic people. Excuse me for that. Islamic people, if they're talked about in the newspaper, it's very often the framing that goes on is radical Islamic terrorism. Radical Islamic terrorism. Now, two out of those three words are pretty scary in and of themselves. Radical. People generally don't like that word radical. It means off the charts, off the grid, outside of normalcy. And then terrorism. Who really thinks of that as fondly as a term? No. So radical Islamic terrorists. We keep hearing that all the time. It's become a way of framing all Muslims. And social media has had a big part in that. Then we have the concept of agenda setting. Agenda setting is where where the social media tell you not what to think, but what to think about. What to think about. So, for example, who would you say of all the world leaders is the most dangerous world leader to the United States right now? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you've answered Vladimir Putin, right? Because he's in the news. Okay, but we don't hear the leader of Iran being talked about in the news. We don't hear the leader so much of North Korea being talked about in the news. Cuba's hardly talked about anymore. We don't hear from virtually many other countries that don't necessarily have U.S. interests at mind, but we keep hearing about Putin right now. So that's, and a lot of it is because of Donald Trump's association with him. A lot of it is because of Russia's own actions, seizing territories called the Crimea a year and a half ago. A lot of it is because of that, but most of it probably is because his name is what's being circulated on social media and traditional media and in some conversations. So agenda setting takes place. It's not telling you what to think about Putin so much as it's saying to think that Putin is the guy that we need to be thinking about, not Kim Jong-il of North Korea. And many of you may not have even known his name because he's not in the media. He's not part of the agenda. And then finally, we return to a concept that we have also introduced earlier in this class. It's called citizen journalism. And that's where people like you, ordinary people, I'm not saying you're ordinary, but ordinary in terms of professional positions in journalism, ordinary people can get information out there. If you're lucky, if what you produce goes viral, maybe some of you will have produced something viral for this class. If you're lucky enough to get your message out there and it gets picked up and shared enough, you become a journalist. You become the person who's breaking the news to other people. And that is one of the most interesting developments in social media, aside from the one that I mentioned earlier, having to do with that shift. Citizen journalism is profound, and we're seeing it still developing. Who knows where it's going to go? Maybe eventually we won't even have major media organizations like NBC and Fox, because all information will be generated from grassroots. We're going to have to see how that plays out. For now, though, I'm going to give you a bonus. If you mention watermelon in your discussion post response today, watermelon, then I will give you a perfect score. Watermelon is all you have to do. You can even just type one word, watermelon, and I'm going to give you a perfect score today. Why? Because this is my test for seeing how many people in the class are actually watching the videos through to the end. Let's see how you do.